Hey everyone, it's Cody Martin from Martin Computer Graphics, and this is a visual effects breakdown of an Audi video that I posted earlier in the week. The whole purpose of this video is just to break down not all, but at least some of the more major steps in producing, in compositing rather, two CG elements into something that looks and feels like a realistic piece of film. Now, as you can see here, this is a snapshot of the final project here, with all the effects and compositing done and put together into one piece. But what I want to do is show you how it actually starts out, and like I said, I'm going to show you the various major steps that get it to this point, because it doesn't start out this way. I use a compositing software and I build it up in different render passes and layers, such as diffuse, reflection, specular, occlusion, and even add some extras of my own just to give it that realistic feel. For example, the glow around the headlights themselves, I actually used roto shapes for that, and took down the opacity on just a white shape to give it that nice glow, which the white shape actually came from the matte painting of the Audi. So I just took that square and diffused it and blurred it a little bit, and that's what gave it that kind of glow. And same thing with the headlights here at the bottom, which I'll go into more detail with them, but they were also similarly done with roto shapes and some other interesting tricks. Okay, so I'm going to start it from the beginning now. And right here, this little clip here is just the airplane hangar that the Audi is driving down. This is the basic model. It is textured, but this is just the 3D model with just the texturing on, and that's it. Now, as you can see here in this, I'm going to freeze frame it and show you what happens when we add the reflections and the specular onto it. Now, as you can see, this gives it a lot more realistic feel, and yeah, it gives you some of the elements that you would normally see in something that's realistic, because you're going to get reflections off of the floor, because as we know, cement and metal tend to reflect light, and as well as other things. And then right here, now there's one thing I actually forgot to mention. If you notice, you can physically see all of the shapes. You can see the rafters, you can see the skylights, you can see them in precise detail the entire time that they're moving. Now this seems okay, it may look good, but unfortunately it's not very realistic. If something is moving at a high speed, our eyes can't track it that fast. So it tends to blur together. This is something called motion blur, which to have any good motion in CG, you have to add artificial motion blur to it to get that realistic look to it. And that's actually what I'll be doing here in this next freeze frame. You'll see me add the motion blur. Now there you can see it feels more like it's moving at a high rate of speed. Now I will say this right here is not true motion blur. I did use a cheat for it in the compositing program, which is just to blur the image itself. I just used an optical blur on it, which really just, as you can see right here, it just takes away that definition and the sharpness of the image. Now when it's moving, it seems like it's supposed to be that way, because in this shot it's constantly in motion. Now had this started off still, like if the car was sitting here for a couple seconds revving up or turning on, whatever, I wouldn't have been able to use this technique, because it would have blurred when there was no motion at all, which obviously would not have looked very realistic. But for this particular project, it worked out just fine. That's one of the things about visual effects, is you want to make it look realistic, but you also want to make sure that there's always shortcuts you can take to get that desired effect without truly going through it, which it also helped my machine during render times, because since it's not a true motion blur, there's no calculations that need to be done. It's just a simple optical blur, which is perfectly acceptable for this particular project. Now what you're going to see next is the integration of the actual car, the Audi. Now the first thing you'll see is the diffuse, which is basically the general shape of it. I'll let you see that here. It doesn't have any of the reflections, the lighting, or anything on it. It's just the general shape of the vehicle. It's almost a matte, but not nearly. Now what you're going to see here is I'm going to add on just the reflections at this point. You'll see the organic reflections there of the lights going over top. And as you can see right now, it almost looks like it's a stealth or invisible vehicle right now, but you can see it does help bring it into the environment a lot more. I mean, you get that interaction with the lights above, or the road below and the rafters. You can see all that, and it gives you that realistic look to it. Naturally, there's a lot more things that need to be added to it, but it already at this point looks a lot more realistic. The next thing I add to that is going to be the specular and the occlusion. And those are just the different, more complex reflections and light bounces and such. As well as, which I forgot to add that, it also adds the shadow to the bottom, which again, it really, really helps integrate the two CG elements together. Because if you look right there, without adding shadows are probably one of the most important elements in compositing when it comes to integrating, especially when it comes to integrating CG into live action film, because without the shadowing just perfect, it's going to look very sharp, and it's going to be difficult for you to, it's really going to be obvious that it was not meant to be there, that it was just added in post-production. As you can see right there, it's very sharp. You can't. It's clearly a seat's not supposed to be there. So what you normally do is you add the shadowing, and you want to make sure that's just right, and have it kind of fade out and match all the other shadows in the shot. And you also, if you can see, it's very faint, but right around here, this edge on the right hand side is a lot more sharp. Well, not a lot more, but it's a little bit more sharp than on the left hand side here. And what that is an edge blur. It's one of the nodes you can use on in Nuke, and that edge blur, you don't want to do too much because that'll also make it obvious. But you want just that slight edge blur, which it just really helps blend your elements together in the composite. So as you can see, that helps out a lot here. And what you'll see added next are going to be the headlights. Now you'll notice. Now, since this is a CG composite, it's not as simple as you just add the headlights in and automatically they shine on the ground. There are certain ways that you can do that, but in this particular shot, the lights themselves were just a photo element. They weren't actually a 3D light, which I could have produced in another program and rendered that out. Again, this is another cheat which we can use for this particular project because of the simplicity of the angle and the motion. I can use just a photo light and doctor that up a bit, and then separately add the headlights on the ground, which you'll see in a minute. Okay, now right there, now these are actually two different elements. You'll see the actual light inside the headlights as well as the LED dots below the bulb. Those were added in first. And now the glow that you see around it, that, like I said earlier, that was a blurred shape that I took from the matte of the headlights, and that was just Now, when I say matte, a matte is just an image broken down into its black and white, solid black or solid white elements, and I just took the white shapes of the headlights there, and I blurred that out and messed with the opacity and feathered it and gave it some fall off, so it kind of emanates from there and it looks like it's a glowing light, but in actuality it's two separate elements. Now, unfortunately, those lights, as cool as they look there, are not very realistic without headlights shining on the bottom. And that's just another way you want to integrate your elements together in the composite. Now, you'll see here in a minute, I'll add those in. So another thing you'll notice is there's a slight... Now, what I did with these here, with the headlights, is I drew, and if you follow the outline of the white here, I drew roto shapes. And again, I made them white. I messed with the feathering, the opacity, the blur, the fall off, and just made it shine on the ground in the shapes, that headlights would normally shine in. And that's just something, there's no real rule of thumb with it. You just have to look at headlights, do your research, check out some reference photos, and try and get that shape just right. Now, one thing you'll notice if you watch over the course of this video is that the car, to get that effect that the camera is moving equally as fast as the car, well, a little bit faster than the car, you'll notice the car kind of drops back and shrinks as if the camera's moving ahead farther. Now, one thing I did, and didn't notice it until I put out the final render, and I was like, this is something I need to change. And I went back and redid it and then rendered it. I had to add a keyframe in here, and that's for the roto shapes of the headlights. And the reason why I had to add two keyframes, actually. One in the beginning here to lock it in place with the car, and then one in the back. Because if you notice, the car slowly drifts back. Now, if I wouldn't have added the keyframes, these headlights, they would have stayed up here in the beginning, and it wouldn't have made sense for the car to drop back and the headlights not to move with it, because the headlights are fixed. They're in one point, so wherever the car moves, the headlights must also move. So that was just another element I added to it. Now, it's not done here. Another thing I did was adjusted. I used a color correction node, and I adjusted the master color as well as the reds and the blues. Now, what I tend to give it that more film look. I wanted to, and also the look of being in normally an airplane hangar, if you're in there and there's no lights on. Now, there are the skylights up top, but they're just letting in natural light. They're not going to be as bright as fluorescent bulbs or anything else that you'd have inside a building. So what I did was I actually lowered the red levels, and I raised the blue levels a little bit just to give it that sort of cyan tint to it. That little bluish tint that looks really great in most films. And I also I used an S curve on the master color correction node, and what I did was I made I made the darkers darker, and I made the whites and the lighter colors a little bit lighter, not too much, but it really gives it that nice film and as well as realistic look to it. Because otherwise it looks too CG like, and I think it does the trick. But you can see it in this next still here, where I just add that color correction and then boom. Now right there, I think that really hits it off. So yeah, that's the end of this video, and really all I wanted to do was just, I feel like unless people have had background in this industry or background in what I do here, they really, it's difficult for someone to appreciate exactly how much work goes into it. I mean, you may see, just like you'll see a car commercial, or you'll see a commercial for a new video game or a new movie, and you'll see the effects, you'll see what's happening, but you don't really understand what's going through it, only because you haven't learned it. That's one of the things I find most exciting about this field, is that just I'm constantly learning how, that's how that's done. Seeing a movie like Transformers before I started going to the school, and I'm like, that's a really cool movie, cool. And then seeing it again after I'm well into this course, I'm well into my senior year, it amazes me, just all of the work that went into that movie was incredible. Regardless of your feelings on the film itself or the actors or the director, it doesn't matter. The CG work on that was incredible. And basically what I'm trying to do with this video is just show to people who aren't knowledgeable in this field, the work that does go into it, and the different steps, and really there are a lot more steps. I just showed you, this is just the finished product, which I rendered out at different stages, which weren't even all of the stages. They were just the major stages, because really for every transition I showed you on here, there was about 4 or 5 different elements that were mixed together just to give that added effect. And of course, each one of those elements, it takes time to composite them, and as well as model them, texture them, light them. Everything in this field does take time. It's by no means at times it does. If you do it right, you really nice finished product. And that was the point of this video. So I hope you enjoy it. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to ask me via email, Facebook, phone number. My website's on there. And this has been another Martin Computer Graphics video. Thanks for watching.